besides exporting social media into the United States, one of the things that the CCP is exporting, and something you've written quite a bit about, is fentanyl. So, fentanyl is an extraordinarily serious issue. It is by far the leading cause of death for people under 45 in the United States.
Yep.
It's killing something like 70,000 Americans a year.
200 a day.
Sorry?
200 a day. 200
a day. This is insane to me. But what's really insane is that this is not a random thing. Like, this doesn't just happen to be the new drug of choice, right?
It's a poison. This is not a drug. I mean, in many cases, people die the first time they use it, and they don't know they're using it, or they don't know they're touching it, right? I mean, 3-year-olds are not dying of drugs. They're being poisoned. That's what's happening. Police officers touch fentanyl in somebody's pocket are not dying of drug overdose. They're being poisoned.
Right. I mean, from what I understand, there are medical, in the past there have been medical prescriptions for fentanyl, right, as a legitimate pharmaceutical, but that is just not what we're seeing right now.
Right. I mean, it's a broad category, like opioid. I mean, it's a broad category of drugs and chemicals that are used to make these things. And it requires a sophisticated chemical and pharmaceutical industrial base to produce these chemicals, right? So, I mean, we should be very clear that the concern we have from China is the production and export of those precursors, those chemicals that are made by chemical companies and pharmaceutical companies for the express purpose of creating fentanyl.
So, to what degree is the Chinese Communist Party behind fentanyl in the United States?
Well, I think the bipartisan House Select Committee provided. I think your readers or your watchers should go and look it up. But in April of this year, provided a report that sort of looked at the details of the party's culpability in both the production and export of these precursors, as well as the turning a blind eye to all the money laundering that allows this drug trade to happen through Mexico, but also through Canada into the United States. For a country that can erase all references to June 4th, 1989 within a matter of seconds across an internet of 1.4 billion, I find it a bit inconceivable that Beijing doesn't have the ability to control the production and export of these chemicals if it chose to. And we also have evidence that, and this is what the House Select Committee has pointed out, is that we have evidence that the Chinese government has set up an export subsidy regime to compensate those companies, chemical companies and pharmaceutical companies, that make fentanyl precursors and export them. Now, those things are illegal to sell inside China, but they actually get a subsidy to sell them outside of China.
And so they're selling them to like Mexican drug cartels, who then sort of assemble those.
The United States. It's
okay.
They've since mostly shifted to then Mexican drug cartels as the way in which they send those chemical precursors.
So, it seems like, well, if the United States can just get China to agree to stop the fentanyl crisis, then maybe they will, right? I mean, both Trump and Biden have talked with Xi Jinping about this and gotten Xi Jinping to promise that he was going to rein it in. So why hasn't that worked?
Because it's not in their interest to stop this crisis from happening. So, I mean, again, I'm, it's a bit mind-boggling to me that Beijing would choose to try and fix something that they see as fundamentally harming their rival. And I find it disturbing that we are not openly talking about that, right? That we are somehow excusing this behavior intentional behavior. They know exactly what's happening, and to say that this is just an American problem. It's not our problem, and that if you want us to address it, you need to do some things for us, right? A very sort of extortion-esque kind of response, and I find that deeply sickening. As 200 Americans die every day.
Why do you think the US government kind of treats it like, the message that comes across is like, "Oh, they're trying." Like, the Chinese government is trying to rein it in, it's hard for them,
It's a really
they're
big country. They
Mhm.
barely have a bureaucracy that can work, right? All these sorts of excuses. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, there's one I've never heard of, China being accused of having too little bureaucracy
Right.
before, but,
No, this is just a really complex problem. If only they could get the information from us of who's doing this, as if China doesn't actually have a way to collect information on terrible and bad things that are happening inside their own country.
do you think this is something that these officials believe, or are they trying to do some kind of, like, weird face-saving thing?
Yeah, I still don't understand the position. I mean, part of it, I suspect, part of it arises from just the absolute unwillingness to contemplate that a foreign power would purposefully do this to us. Maybe it's a failure of imagination, um, because it would seem that the idea of causing massive social problems with the deaths of hundreds of thousands of Americans, when China views itself as in a long-term and existential struggle with the United States, something that weakens us, is in their interest to continue.
Yeah. We can also see how China can definitely imagine a foreign power doing this to them, right? I mean, because they're thinking back 150 years ago to when the British were exporting opium to China, and it was weakening China. And I think that to say they're salty about it would be an understatement.
Yes, yeah. I mean, it is the foundation of the century of humiliation and the entire sort of narrative around victimization. So I know the administration has announced some progress. So China has listed a handful of chemicals, but of course there are hundreds. And each time something is blocked, a simple tweak to the chemical makeup, and then you have a whole new one. And it appears, at least to me, that entire export subsidy regime has not been taken down.
So if somehow China were to actually stop allowing exports of these fentanyl precursor chemicals, would that actually stop the fentanyl crisis in the US? Because people in the US are still buying drugs and have been since long before fentanyl was an issue. I mean, can't American drug dealers just make it in their basement or a camper van like in Breaking Bad when they made meth?
Yeah, so I think one thing is to clear the chemicals that are these precursors that are being used require an industrial base to be able to make, right? So these are a bit different than the things that were around methamphetamines. Certainly different than growing poppies and making heroin, right? I mean, of course, those are all terrible problems as well, and things that have infected and have afflicted the United States for a long period of time and have led to many deaths. But looking at DA's numbers and FDA's numbers and others, I mean, we see like a hockey stick spike in deaths as fentanyl has vastly outpaced the deaths that have been caused by others, right? And so, and it's because sometimes this is laced into other drugs, right? So folks they think they're taking like an ecstasy pill, and it's actually been laced with fentanyl that causes their death, right? So, recreational drug users are then dying from these things. I mean, that's not exactly in the interests of presumably of a drug dealer that would want to keep those people buying more of them. So it's a terrible situation, and I wish we would take it more seriously.
Is there anything specifically that you think the U.S. administration or Congress can do to not just get Xi Jinping to agree to stop, but to actually completely stop this flow of fentanyl from China? Or
well, first of all, I
flow
think
of precursors.
likely an enormous amount has been exported over the past 5 years, in which it would take years, if not decades, for all of the precursors that have already been exported to for the inventory to work its way down. I mean, I don't know what those numbers are, but I think we should be very clear to ourselves that if China decided to stop today, it wouldn't mean that deaths would stop tomorrow because it ran out. There would be an inventory that's there that would last a long period of time. I think we should be very straightforward about their culpability. Covering for them and pretending that they're not culpable and they're trying hard is not helpful.